Welcome to Church History, welcome to 401CH, welcome to page 9 of 30. If you're working with certain handouts, is it a good thing for the church to wield worldly power? The aim here is for us to explore the problem of power using great schisms and icons. Well, we've talked a bit about that already. Pope versus Emperor. Who makes who? We won't explore the Virgin Mary and cathedrals. There's a little bit of stuff in my notes, but I'm going to skip over that to the Crusades, to monasticism and farming evangelists, and one more thing after that. So we're looking at how to make a failing relationship. West does dumb stuff to the East. Or who's the most important person in the kingdom, Pope versus Emperor, how to break a ruined relationship, Crusades, and set up an apologetics problem for the rest of history, how to get on with the gospel when church leadership are such duffers, laity and the monks, and how to see if somebody is a proper Christian, as we'll see when we get to the Inquisition. So here we are, the Great Schism. This is a sad story. Step 1. The West adds the Filioque clause 593 without inviting the East to that council. So a poor step there. Step 2, where we have a mix of religion and politics. The West doesn't really like icons and the East does. And the East does some invading and into Italy. And then and that gets driven out. You've got problems in the West where the papacy is being turned into a bit of a brothel, gambling away huge amounts of money. So you've got a mess going on there. And in the 11th century, you've got this rise of popes who are wanting to control the whole of Christendom. And so the key question for them is, who's more important than who? And momentarily the question is the West more important than the East? And so we have Humbert of Moyenmoutier sent to Constantinople in 1054 as a representative of the Pope to insist that the Patriarch of Constantinople submit to the Pope in Rome and accept the extra words of the Creed, Filioque clause. And the Patriarch refused, since the words had not been accepted by a council of the whole Church. And so a second document excommunicating the Patriarch is published, and it's thrown into the street after the fleeing Humbert. So not a good moment, and that's sort of why we date the schism to that moment there, 1054. The Crusades in time will harden this split, as we'll shortly see. I've got some nice quotes here from Bishop Callistos, Timothy Ware, who was an English convert to Orthodoxy, and he's written, I think, some helpful things. I'll just give you one of them, where he says that the Latin approach tends to be more practical and the Greek more speculative. Latin thought was influenced by juridical ideas, by concepts of Roman law, while the Greeks understood theology in the context of worship and in the light of Holy Liturgy. Trying to explain how Greek and Latin, Western and Eastern mindsets were just so very different. And there's some more here. So we look at this need for renewal and the power of the popes. Bear in mind how the clergy are untrained, how church posts can be bought. Even the Pope is appointed by the strongest ruler of the time. So, feudal lords would select candidates for church posts and control church affairs. So this great prayer and cry for renewal in Christianity, and God seems to move and bring forth the monastic movement. And we'll look at that a bit more in a moment, but just for a moment let's have a look at the Cluniacs. How the Cluniac order, founded in 910 in France, and it reinvigorated monasticism. You need to remember that we're at a time that is less individualistic and more corporate. And so in being more corporate, the idea of me, a rich person who's rather busy making money, paying you, a poor monk, to pray prayers for me, is the important thing here. So whereas you might sort of laugh and mock at that, actually we do a lot of that in the church already, and it just goes on. So consider how we employ youth workers. Now, in part that's because youth workers are better at it than we are, but it's also in part because we don't want to do that. We'll let you do that. So I've got money, I'll pay you to do that, rather than me myself getting involved in the work that we're doing. So here we've got this economy of prayer. The thing that matters is the prayer gets prayed, not that I do the pray. You can do the pray. What matters is that God hears prayers, and if I can pay you to pray my prayers, then that's great. Get on with it, and then I can get on with making money, and so everyone's happy. It's a good economy. It makes sense in that setup. Nick Page refers to it as outsourcing your penance, which is a rather good way of putting it. Now, we note how the Cluniac monks grow in size, in influence, and they begin to untangle themselves from feudal control, and they say, we are only going to be answerable to the Pope and not to our feudal overlords. We've got enough money, we've got enough land to be able to say that and to be ourselves. They're being countercultural in the way in which they are living. And then as they grow, they actually turn to the Pope and go, yeah, not you. We're going to work out who we want to be in charge of us, and it's not going to be the Pope. And so they step aside from that. So there you go. This is the culture that these things are all happening in. Now, we're looking at the question of power and wielding worldly power. And it's never a very good thing when you have to make someone say sorry. And we have here this moment where Pope Gregory VII has a head-to-head with the Emperor Henry IV. There's a rather good chapter about it in this book, which is one of the recommended books in the on one of the book lists for this course. George Herring's An Introduction to the History of Christianity. He pauses at this point. And it's about when you're made to say sorry. And it succeeds. Henry IV, the Emperor Henry IV, stands in the snow for 3 days before being forgiven. And so he avoids being deposed, he avoids being excommunicated. And you realise if the Pope excommunicates you, in these days, it's a big and serious issue. It's not just you don't get any bread and wine on Sundays. It's your minions no longer have to pay tax to you. They no longer have to obey you. It has big political, tax and military implications. So Henry IV, the Emperor, goes, all right, fine, I'll say sorry. He says sorry, but everybody else is going, oh, look at that. Okay, we're going to watch the church here, and we're going to think about how we relate to the church. And so I think it sets up a problem for later years. So I'm on to page 12 now with the Norman conquest. And here we find William, who decides he has a case for being the next King of England. And he asks the Pope, Gregory VI, what do you think? And the Pope loves being asked, because this is him, spiritual authority, getting to wield earthly power by saying, yes, I think it'd be a very good idea for you to be king there. Here, let me give you a ring, let me give you a banner. And so now your invasion of England is now has the Pope's backing. And so poor Harold finds himself excommunicated and finds himself fighting God as well as William. And so we literally have 1066 and all that. So let's have a look at the Crusades. There's too many of them to sort of look at it in any sense of detail, and even my notes are pretty poor in that regard. I think one of the most helpful things is to consider the Crusades as waves rather than this is a crusade, this is a crusade. I know historians like to do that because they like to give some dates and give some numbers, and that's fine, and that's, you know, to a large extent right. But you still have this sense of ongoing waves of crusades throughout this period. It's certainly an apologetics problem for us. There's no getting away from that. I did read in one crusade book about how more Christians killed Christians during this period than they killed Muslims. And yeah, I can believe that. There's certainly a sense of stupidity as the Western Christians arrive in the East, and they see these people with turbans, and they go, well, you're not Western, so you're not Christian, so I'm going to kill you. And without much thought or pause, would just wade into it. Have mercy upon the Eastern Emperor Alexius, as he is worried about Constantinople. He makes a treaty with the local Turks, and that infuriates the Crusaders. But you know, if you're looking after this city of Constantinople and you just see a whole bunch of thousands upon thousands upon thousands of invaders coming over the hill, I mean, they're only passing through, obviously, but who knows what's going to happen. You'd be right to be nervous about it, and so to call upon the native Muslims to say, can you help here in defending us? I understand that line of thought. Page 14 has some bloody quotes there for you, so you can read that. And we're going to look at the growth of monasticism and move on to monks. This is a marvellous moment, setting God's people free. And a good quote here from Eamon Duffy. At the opening of the 11th century, the papacy was a contradictory mixture of exalted theory and squalid reality. Excellent quote. Oh, that also comes from Herring from here. So, what we're going to see is a cycle of reform. Devout Christians look at the church and see that it is wealthy, lax, corrupt. So, step 2, they establish a new movement that takes Christianity back to its roots. Step 3, the new movement becomes successful and becomes popular. Step 4, becomes so popular that it becomes wealthy and lax and corrupt, and so repeat. We've already seen the Cluniacs, so let's look at the Cistercians. They emphasize hard manual labour and private prayer, and they go to places that nobody else wants to go to, and they turn wildernesses into farmland, and they welcome people who don't want to be monks. They just want to be part of what it is that you've got, so you have lay brothers getting involved. Bernard of Clairvaux becomes the abbot here, and he's written some good stuff, and there's a couple of quotes here. A saint is not someone who never sins, but one who sins less and less frequently and gets up more and more quickly. And so on to the Franciscans, St. Francis of Assisi, and his desire for poverty, because when you've got nothing, you don't have to worry about anything, and you can worry about other people and care for them instead of being worried about what it is that you have. And in time, they were permitted to have their own property, and so their cycle starts again. And the Dominicans rise up, and these are monks who are keen to educate the clergy to be better preachers. Now, this is tricky, because this is where you go from being a keen Dominican, keen to educate you, to being a better priest. But as I come around and visit, I might be a little bit concerned in case you're a bit heretical. And so they get the nickname of being the watchdogs of God as they begin to hunt down heresy, and they're used in that way. So, you will at some point or other be licensed for some sort of ministry in the church. You'll become a vicar, a minister, a leader of a congregation. And when you'll arrive, you'll hear lots of people, you'll see what they do, and you'll wonder, are you a proper Christian? Now, what are you going to do? because your pastoral studies will tell you just listen to them and love them. All right, your doctrinal studies will tell you to see how much of the Nicene Creed they can tick. Your Anglican studies will say, don't worry about them, just ask them to be your church warden. But your history class will say, have you ever thought about the Inquisition? So, nobody expects a Spanish Inquisition, and if we were meeting as a lecture room, I'd probably let you watch that sketch at this point as a little teaser moment of break and relief. You've got Peter Waldo, who is the leader of the Waldensians, as it is, and he gets hold of some Bible, he translates it into the vernacular, and he uses it for evangelism. Good for you, Peter. The Pope likes it. And then the Pope doesn't like it. And then the Waldensians are going, well, we're not sure if we like the Pope anyway. And so begins a little bit of a persecution against these people who are not playing ball. You're not part of the team. But of course the team is pretty corrupt and so on, but that's not the point. You're missing the point. What do you do with people like this? So different kings, like King Louis VIII of France, issues an edict in 1226 under which bishops could judge and the French law would punish heretics. You've got Pope Innocent IV, who condones the use of torture. Great name, Pope Innocent, condoning the use of torture. You just got to go with it. And so here we come to this Inquisition. Now, generally, the Inquisition was a special court with power to judge intentions as well as actions. The Inquisitor would arrive in town, call for reports of those suspected of heresy, and there would then be a special Inquisition with special summonses, a special trial. And here the Inquisitor gets to act as judge, prosecutor and jury. You didn't have a defense lawyer because defense lawyers pretty quickly figured out that if they were defending you, they were in trouble of being accused themselves. And so that was the result. Very often, if you hurried up and confessed, there would be a mild level of trouble, penalty that flowed from that. But the slower you were to confess, the longer and more gruesome might be the penance that flowed. You might end up wearing a badge of shame. You might merely have to hear some masses and go on a pilgrimage or pay a fine. You might suffer what was called civil death, where you lost the right to hold a public office. And with a few, there ended up being the stake. But very rare. 5%, says one statistic I came across. Now, on the plus side, because of the papacy and because of feudal lords not being quite sure who's actually in control, who's got the power, because of disputes between them, the Inquisition couldn't go into certain places, and so a number of places got away without much of that. We're shortly coming to witchcraft, in case you were wondering where that is headed. But what we see here is a problem of when the church has powers that maybe it shouldn't have. And today we still see elements of this, where your bishop views him herself as your employer, has decided something about you as you come to your bishop's advisory panel, or even after that has said, oh, you're that sort of a person, are you? And has put you into some sort of box. And so you end up with trouble of a different sort. We ought to touch a little bit on Spain, because invariably, that's where the mocking part of the Spanish Inquisition sketches tend to come from. It starts off with a period in which the Muslims drove the Christians into the hills, and then there's the slow reconquista, the reconquering of the land from the 8th century through to the 12th century. And when they've finally done that, what they really want to do is they really want to make sure that you are on board, and in order to do that, we really want you to be Catholic. And I don't care if you're Jew, I really want you to be a Catholic. And so a lot of Jews left. They went off to Venice, where they set up their own areas, and that's curiously where we get our word ghetto from. But those who remained, a number of them became baptized Catholics. but even still, always their loyalty was questioned, and so it was difficult for them. Diamond McCulloch comforts us with the thought that the Spanish Inquisition killed less than the secular courts. So whilst in our vernacular in church history, we tend to go, oh, the Spanish Inquisition, that was terrible. It seems to have been killing off less people than in other courts. So that'll do for now, and I will see you shortly.